For it is written that in the last days, the Christ will return like a thief in the night, taking his true believers to his Father on high. This one event is known to Christians as the rapture, thus fulfilling the prophetic second coming.
What if in this society, the greatest man who ever lived came back to the society as a man of color? How would he be treated?
Action!
My brother Frank and I had an idea to deal with this image of Christ, who was a man of color. I need to clarify a couple of things. When people speak about this project, oftentimes they say the movie about the black Jesus, the black Christ, the black Messiah. It's not any of those things. It's a movie of Christ, about the Messiah, about Jesus.
Jesus comes back to earth, present day, to try to win a few more converts back, to try to win a couple more converts before the rapture, or when the Christians will go into heaven to meet their Lord. In doing that, he heals a young little girl, a little girl that was a paraplegic. She was crippled. Both of her legs were crippled. Shortly after, she's raped and beaten heinously, heinous crime. Automatically, the blame goes towards this man that appears as a Rastafarian black man with long dreadlocks, and he is automatically accused of this crime, put into like the depths of hell, which is the way we described it is this institution for the criminally insane. And while there, we play out the drama of a multi-personality where we can get several different ideas or mindsets of our society. We see the evils and the good of this earth as we know it. In effect, the little girl that was raped and beaten is brought there by her father, who we see actually accepts this man to be the Christ, his savior, which he has always known to be a white man. And ultimately, the rapture, where Jesus ascends into heaven, taking all the true believers to God.
See, what happens when you say a black Jesus or a black Christ, it's a different kind of that we're playing make-believe with. It's like saying, this is a story about a black Santa Claus, as opposed to saying Santa Claus. You say Santa Claus and people know Santa Claus was white, with long beard. He was a big, chubby, fat guy. I always knew of Christ in my mind and my heart as being a man of color. So that's why it's important to clarify. This is a movie about Jesus. The whole vibe and how he wanted to present this interpretation was to say, this is our interpretation, and this interpretation is valid. It ain't about make-believe. It's valid. And you can take it and run with it. You can take it and accept it, or you can reject it. But this is our interpretation.
We believe him to be a Jew. Jesus was a rabbi. We're disagreeing with the hue of his skin tone, or his skin tone, actually. That's the only disagreement on our part. We don't disagree that he was a Jew. He was a learned rabbi, a scholar, and he just happened to be of a darker hue in our belief.
How in the hell are you supposed to be Christ? You as black as me. Come on, brother, come on. You know Christ wasn't no nigger.
If you go to Israel this hour, you'll find that there are black Jews, many black Jews that you never see, and the media never covers them. So there are black Jews all over the world, actually.
Get up the top! These wings are done. Oh my God!
That scene is so important to me personally, and it's so important to Christians, because there's nothing like the notion that you will see his face. And to see his face is just so impactful. It just shakes you, it violently shakes you when you see his face, when you hear his voice, that still small voice. But certainly the image of it was just a powerful, powerful time for me on the set to have that reveal of JC, of Jesus Christ, the Messiah.
But you know, that's very biblical, because people who the world has thrown aside and the world has rejected, such as in Mark 5 with its parallels, the so-called Gerasene demoniac, It's a classic representation of anybody who reads Mark 5, verses 1 to 20 will see very clearly there that this man of the living in the tombs, bruising himself with stones, the minute that he sees Jesus come out of the boat and come upon the seas, he recognizes, even though the world, his family, everyone else says that he's crazy, there's still something left in him sane enough to identify with this Son of God as such. And I think that the film captures that in a wonderful way. And it helps again to indict us by the ways in which we allow the values of the world to alienate us from perhaps what are true and spiritual and divine values of being able to see Jesus for what he is, as a person of compassion and a person who sees beyond our faults and finds our needs and wants to make all of us as better people.
In correcting the, like I said, the lie, you're also uplifting a great many minds of the collective consciousness, because us as a people, black men or black folks as a people, have been torn down for at least in the past especially in the past 300 or 400 years in our oppression. Because we have such a rich history through Egypt and just Africa. We were a very proud race, and it's only been in the past few hundred years that we've been torn down as a people. And that goes to today. I mean, it's almost like a conspiracy where drugs have been put into our system, into our society, I should say, and to uplift the race with anything that we could, especially with the savior of the world, to be black, that's like the best uplifting you can get, that we can give to our people. And as black filmmakers, that's what we want to do.
This film, The Second Coming, I find to be definitive upliftment of African American images in mass media.
I would think of it more as a film to provoke thought, and a film to reaffirm those of us of color who feel we come from nothing or have nothing or are worth nothing. We're people who suffer greatly of self-esteem. And there are those of us who believe that that's how Jesus Christ looked or what he was.
What prompted the whole thing was this understanding that I always had. I had never seen this image portrayed on film. So Frank and I had talked about doing some kind of documentary about 2 or 3 years ago. We had talked about maybe taking a crew, a couple guys, go to Israel, show dark-skinned Jews of a darker hue. I'm getting into that in a second, talking about black Jews. What is black? That's a whole nother clarification. Talking to different rabbis, black rabbis, talking to Ethiopian Jews, talking to theologians here in the States. And so that was an idea, and it had been kind of circling around in our minds to do something like that. What sparked the whole thing was the Rodney King verdict. Not the beating, but when the verdict came down. And those police officers here in Los Angeles were found not guilty. I wanted to do something positive. I wanted to do something that would help and not hinder and not hurt. So out of that came this film, out of that frustration, out of that anger, out of that quiet fury. When we were discussing how are we going to portray this man, there were a couple of things that bothered me that I had never seen. Not to say it hadn't been done, I just hadn't seen it. First of all, this image of this black man who was Christ. Secondly, I never saw Jesus laughing. I'm thinking, if God is love and this man is the Son of God, he's got to have a sense of humor. I mean, this man may have been cracking jokes. He was probably very funny. And we never see him laugh. So I said, that's definitely something I want to incorporate into the film. Seeing this man have a good time and just laugh. And the challenge was dealing with this heavy subject matter. How do we bring that up?
Hello. Hello. I'm Emily.
Jesus.
I know.
I wanted to incorporate a very physical side of Jesus. I mean, this man was a carpenter by trade. His father was a carpenter, and he too was a carpenter by trade. So he had to be very physical, and very seldom do we see him being physical. Oftentimes we see him being very frail and very divine and very serene. But I wanted to see him being physical, and that's why he put that scene in there where Ren is beating his head up against the wall. You see him run across the cell, and he hits Ren against the wall, and he bounces off the wall, and he tries to grab him, and then the film goes on. I won't go into the whole scene, but just these different elements I wanted to incorporate in the characteristics of this man who was a man, who also was the Son of God.
I think this film can make a difference because you're seeing Jesus Christ in a different way. And maybe some people will learn that maybe if he did come back and he was African American, what people would think about it. And maybe this film will let them see what would happen maybe and what good deeds he could do.
The most interesting thing for me on this film happens to be behind the scenes. This film was made with and of a collective consciousness. It was really an ensemble. It was a collaborative effort. I was amazed to have so many black people give of themselves in a very narcissistic industry as creating a support system that was mind-boggling. I mean, it was unbelievable. Ordinarily, when you're on a film and you're about to shoot your close-up, you don't want anyone in your foreground to pull your focus. There would be 30 and 40 people in your foreground, but it didn't make a difference. They didn't get in the way because the spirit was so good and it was so collaborative and it was so, ooh, I want you to win. I want you to turn it out. I want you to do the best that you can do. Turn this thing out, because you know one thing? You all are cooking. I didn't hear anyone on that set disparage any of the process, any of the individuals. We did not have grief on the set. We did not have acrimony between actors and director or crew people and director. We didn't have any of that. Absolutely had none of it. And even in 90 years, when people discuss the second coming, they cannot tell that particular lie, that I was there and it was awful. They fought every day, fought every minute. It's a wonder they got it made. They won't be able to say that, because I'm here to vouchsafe that it was absolutely the most serene, celestial experience I've ever had in the business of show.
This was all prophesied, so you knew this was going to happen. He knew this was going to happen, but still, it's the pain of losing your son.
This film is a wake-up call. I would also say to those people who doubt this image that this image is documented, and that we're not making this image up. This is not make-believe or let's pretend. This is a reality. And but there are some people who will find it hard to accept, because then it will shatter a lot of other so-called superiority illusions. But I think for African Americans, it will give us a much needed affirmation of Christ, because so many of us do worship Jesus Christ.
Do you really think you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God? Well, God better bring himself down here and save your ass, because you're in my house now.
I think this man represents the ignorant, fearful part of society that suppresses that kind of religious freedom or freedom of thinking.
Changes medication.
The guy was so smooth and slick and comfortable within his hate that he was almost... I mean, I remember watching it, and a few times the audience laughed at this character, which is kind of scary, because these people usually are. There usually is some sort of unctuous charm and believability and credibility about them. You know, they're so sure of themselves. They're so comfortable within their prejudice and their hate that it's very frightening. And unfortunately, it's very effective. And that's what's scary.
It's like the racism is stupid, because if all people were white, it would be no fun. The world would be no fun. That's just like saying if everybody had a monotone voice, nothing would be fun. You know, because you wouldn't be able to hear the excitement in their voices or the sadness in their voices. You know, because if everybody talked like this, you wouldn't tell what I was saying, and it'd be stupid. And it's just like saying this world has to be different, and that's why we all live. And if everything was the same, it'd be a boring place.
I think that the film, The Second Coming, will understandably be provocative and will cause some people to get their backs up and to be somewhat disturbed by it. It's a bit shocking to the average person that's used to European art and the media, which American media, and even religious images that all of the churches have perpetuated over the years, that Jesus was somehow European, white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, and so forth. People have just accepted that because they have felt that white people have been in control and in power, certainly in the last several hundred years. But there's actually nothing wrong with Jesus being a person of color, especially since there's so much evidence that the people who inhabited that land 2,000 years ago, in the first century of the Common Era, were people of color.
I felt like misled by all the years growing up and seeing a little blue-eyed, blonde Jesus Christ and the perfect-looking features in Mary, these saints, these icons that I grew up believing in. I felt betrayed because this is just as valid, just as relevant as any other ethnic Jesus Christ, and probably more so, given geographically where this took place and what happened. And if people could only open their eyes and see that this is a strong possibility, and if so, what difference does it make? You know, what difference does all this concern about color and race, and we have to let go of that as a people, or else I fear what's going to become of us as a race. So, something that simple, seeing it with the power with which this film portrayed it, gave me a whole other concept of what might have been. And it was an eye-opener.
The thing that excites me so much about this film is that it is a revolutionary revelation. In that it raises some very fundamental questions that in our gut or in our innermost being have kind of always been there, but for whatever reason we have felt as though that's a question you don't ask. It's kind of like they used to say you don't question God. You just accept certain things. You don't question God. And of course we've learned that even Jesus had some questions about God. When he died on the cross, he asked, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" Certain things like men don't cry. And so we've learned that even Jesus cried, who was the epitome of manhood. In those kinds of categories, I believe, there also resides this issue of not just who Jesus was, but what did he look like? What did he look like? And this film raises that kind of issue in a very positive and credible way, not merely based on mythology or fantasy, but based on reliable history.
When one considers the way Jesus is depicted in this film, The Second Coming, one should rejoice at the subject matter of multiculturalism. That is to say that multiculturalism today in America and in the world is an appropriate topic to be able to understand how all of us as people are living in a global village. We have to look at each other and appreciate each other's stories. And I think it's high time that we begin to engage in what I have written about and called corrective historiography, that we begin to correct the traditional imbalance. I think that this film is an opportunity for us to cause people to think about the fact that that where Jesus lived and his people and the places that were familiar to him were were indeed the places that identified with people of color. And there doesn't have to be anything frightening or threatening about that. There certainly are white people in the Bible. There are white people who've achieved many things. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But I think that what people need to do is to recognize that all of God's creatures have made contributions. And that there shouldn't be anything wrong with an idea of a Jesus as a person of color, which is more historically accurate.
Man, you know what? Whenever you deal with the question of who and what Jesus was, you're dealing with a potential time bomb, and people get very, it's very sensitive. So I wouldn't even approach something like this unless I did a lot of research.
Christianity has been at a disadvantage, in a sense, especially in the black community, because of the fact that many of our Muslim brothers have portrayed and presented Christianity as a white man's religion. And that particular stance, which has affirmed blackness and affirmed the rich heritage of black people intentionally, especially through the black Muslim faith, has been very attractive to many in the black community. This film certainly, I think, brings to bear and brings to light not fable, but rather valid and credible historical facts that dispel that particular line of thinking. So that Christianity is not and never has been a white man's religion, although it may have been whitened through history, but certainly that is not a part of its roots. For example, how many times have you or I ever sat in a church, in a class, read in a piece of religious or spiritual literature? How many times have we ever heard it said that God told Joseph and Mary to hide Jesus in Africa? Now, we certainly have heard the text that says take him to Egypt, but last time I checked, Egypt was still in Africa. And so my point is that very subtle approaches and very subtle presentations of Scripture have resulted in a disenfranchisement of people of color. But again, careful examination and study and scholarship will reveal that it was not so in the beginning. And so we now have a film that presents not only the very spiritually traumatic and the anticipated and for many long-awaited second coming of Christ. And so we not only in this film deal with the fact that he's coming again, but now we're dealing with, now look see what he looks like. But I think that's very positive. I think we as a people, again, have felt removed. Understand that what is being portrayed, and certainly the principle behind what's being portrayed in this film, is not one of adding to Scripture, but in fact, it is an enhancement of what's always been there.
I think the implications of a black Jesus, unfortunately, to many people, for some reason, poses a threat. And it poses a threat that most white people, unfortunately, have this very smug, complacent sense of superiority. And I don't know from whence it comes. Maybe it's European conditioning. Maybe it's Hollywood and what Hollywood's projected. And I think it poses a threat that it's a very desperate time now. It's a very, monetarily, people, the economy, people are afraid, people are so damn afraid, and people are very desperate, and there's more people on this planet than ever, and it's very crowded, and it's very frantic, and everyone's trying to make a living, and there's many homeless people, so people have to believe somehow in their superiority, or that they're somehow entitled to something better, and if they don't get this, it shakes their world, so it creates such fear in them that they can do stupid things, you know. They can become violent.
This whole question about could Jesus be black? Okay, now they're trying to make Jesus black. First of all, as we say in the film, there's a scene where Ren approaches JC, Jesus Christ, and he says, how in the hell are you supposed to be Christ? You as black as me. You know Christ wasn't no nigga. And the response to that is blackness is far more than perception. Blackness is also that which is inherited through ancestral lineage. And then he goes on to say it's relevant whether your skin color is black or white, if the light or dark. If the roots of the tree are black, then the fruit must be black. So you're left with the question, what is black? What is blackness? Are we talking about what we see before us, seeing the dark skin? We're talking about a bloodline. Now you can't have it both ways. People in this country have told us for centuries, or during slavery and up until this day, if you have that much black blood in you, you're a nigga. So when it's about being a nigga, if you got the least amount of black blood in you, it's a bad thing. But when you start talking about Christ, it's like, well, no, because he didn't look black, he didn't look dark, so he wasn't black. But no, if you know your history, and it's very important, and I want people to know this when they see this film, when they see these interviews, no matter what we say or how we say, if you know your history, you ask about the critics of this film, you can't take issue with me until you take issue with the Bible, and you take issue with history. Because history will tell you this man almost had to be dark-skinned. And you say black African-American, there was not an America then, so you can't say African-American. We're saying he was dark-skinned, we're saying he was Jewish, we're saying he was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and that was his culture. It was rooted in Judaism. But we're saying he almost had to have dark skin.
Well, race is very significant, even though many people today, when we raise this subject, try to pretend as though we should not focus upon race. But we must understand that images are a form of power. And if this were not the case, then we would have seen a much more of a willingness on the part of those who dominate in the media or run the political economy of the United States and so forth, willing to show a variety of images of Jesus. Why is Jesus so consistently portrayed in one light, if it didn't matter? So we certainly have evidence of Byzantine art, say in the early medieval period, that begins to show Jesus as, or the mother and child, or the Holy Family, as a European. But what most people don't realize is that the earliest of these Madonna and child statues, the earliest ones depict Jesus and the mother or Mary as being African or with clearly Africoid features. Now, even though you see this ethnocentrism in the art forms, beginning, say, with the Byzantine period, what we don't see is an alignment of this depicting of Jesus and his mother or Joseph as European. You don't see this accompanying or being accompanied by racial theories of inferiority and superiority. That doesn't develop until this later period of about the 15th or 16th century. In fact, I've studied this matter at some length in terms of trying to determine when we find the first systematic theories of racial superiority as being assigned to Caucasians or Anglo-Saxon. And we really don't find these theories before the 16th century BC. We must remember Shakespeare had no problems, and he was writing at the end of the 16th century and beginning of the 17th century, and he had no problems with Othello the Moor, the Venetian black general. And so I think that we have to just keep in mind the fact that that it is fairly that the whole question of racism in terms of its systematic pseudoscientific theoretical formulations is a fairly modern development, and the average person really doesn't realize how modern racism really is.
I think that, you conceivably are going to have more problems in the reception that this film receives from white Christians than you will from Jews, because you've got the white Christian is been born and raised with the fact that Jesus was white, and some of them may look at it as a mockery, or somehow have an attitude. Well, wait a second, Jesus is black. See, to the Jew, it's not really relevant as to whether he was white or black. The real issue, as we said before, is whether Jesus is the Messiah, or in the eye of the Jews, a philosopher, sort of a prophet, but not the Messiah. And that's the real issue. It's a theological issue, whereas I think with white Christians, you're going to have more of a problem receiving them as their Messiah being black, as opposed to the traditional white Jesus.
The issue of ethnocentricity, of Afrocentrism in Scripture is not a matter of putting in what is not there, but rather it is one of acknowledging and affirming what always has been there. And so scholars like Dr. Felder and others have, I believe, been really called of God, in a sense, to remove the veil that has hidden these truths that have always been there. So we're not recreating, or we're not manufacturing something, but we are in fact revealing what has always been there.
For too long, Jesus has been depicted in a unhistorical, inaccurate mode, and really, this is, to me, is a wonderful opportunity for a new level of discussion about it. I think that most people who would like to dismiss the idea of Jesus being a person of color out of hand, many of these people already have an ideological bias against people of color and believe that Europe is at the center of the world in every respect. I'm happy to say that many of my colleagues in the field of biblical scholarship are increasingly making concessions and indicating that Jesus would have to be considered a person of color. But again, you must remember that for the longest period, as last 200, 300, 400 years, so much of the European Academy, European scholars, American white scholars, have all worked together, sort of footnoting each other and quoting each other, and they simply have not even thought about the over 100 references to Egypt in the Bible, over 40 references to biblical Ethiopia in the Bible. These were were not even thought about the significance implications of this. So actually, if you do a litany of the different Bible passages which cite in very favorable terms Africa, then it will be much easier to appreciate how, of course, Jesus was a person of color.
When you sit down and understand how societies, not only American societies, but societies as a whole, utilize images to control the way we think, what we purchase, how we look at ourselves, how others perceive us, the importance of the image of Jesus Christ as being a man of color is very important.
I think it's significant because it changes the entire concept of Jesus. It's a whole different concept. All of us were raised as Jesus being white. It's a whole different idea. All of a sudden, maybe he wasn't, and it changes how people look at it can have an effect as to how people look at blacks, because all of a sudden you've got the Messiah to the Christian world being black. Well, how does that fit in with the overall attitude towards blacks? If the Messiah was black, I think it could have a tremendous impact on how people look at blacks, and hopefully will.
African Americans need an elixir. They need a balm in Gilead, desperately. Desperately, we need that as a people. And it's significant that way to have this image of the Messiah, a Messiah who looks like us. It's so important, and ultimately, it doesn't make a difference whether or not our Messiah is culturally aligned with us. But we're dealing with the image business. We're dealing with images that on a day-to-day basis tell us that we're awful, that we're ugly, that we're ignorant, that to speak standard American English is to be white boy or white girl-like. And so we have been inculcated with so many negatives throughout the history of the image business and in mass media that it's particularly important to see this particular image.
We must remember, as a number of scholars have pointed out, that the first century really is a world before color prejudice. That the Bible itself represents a time when there were no theories of racial superiority and racial inferiority. There were no systematic views or theories of race that claimed a pseudoscientific basis. That, unfortunately, is a modern European racialist mode of thinking. And I think once we try to understand how different the biblical world or the ancient world really was in terms of its racial attitudes, it was a time of racial tolerance. Then I think we are all to be instructed, not only by this film, The Second Coming, but simply by the way in which our socialization has really caused a lot of miseducation for whites as well as Asians and people of other races, and unfortunately too many blacks who also would have problems with the black presentation of Jesus.
Excellent. There you go. Let's do it here. All right. Going to number one position. Number one. Going to number one position. While we're waiting, let's go through one more. Okay, we're going to do it. One practice run for camera.
Blair is just so good to work with because he knows what he wants. He has a vision, and he knows he's really tuned into it, to me, and everything about this production. It's a lot of love happening here.
You always talk about 110%. Even like my father, he always said, just as black men in this society, you always have to give that extra 10%. That's what the crew gave. It was 116 degrees that day. It was out in Santa Clarita, California, not too far from Magic Mountain. And it was so hot that the Roman soldiers that were casted, there was a medicon on the set that day, and she said, Frank, if you do not get them water, if you do not stop production for a few minutes or 20 minutes, they're going to dehydrate. They're going to die right there in the set. People were so into it, and you couldn't help but not to, because it was such a mind-blowing experience, because you get on the set, and you look up on the hill, and there's these 3 crosses, and it looked like the location that was picked, it looked like Calvary, Golgotha, the place of the skull where Jesus was crucified. It was barren, seemingly devoid of life. There was weeds up there. There's a little bit of greenery, but it was desert greenery. It was powerful. And I think, people lost sight of taking care of themselves and of the heat, because nobody really complained. Like Rosalind, she was wearing wool. It was 116 degrees out there, and she was wearing a wool robe down to her feet, down to her ankles. And I didn't hear a peep of complaint out of her that whole day. It was mind-blowing even to watch that people could deal with that type of heat, which they're not normally used to, I don't think, and still be caught up in the moment or the day. And we were out there for almost 20 hours that day.
Anybody that was on the set that first day in 110-degree temperature and saw the enthusiasm and saw the dedication and the commitment that this group of professionals had, there was no way that I could not become a part of that. I believed in what he was trying to do. Blair initially said, just come out for one day, I'll tell you up front. There's no money involved. Sometimes you have to do things because you love what you do. And so I decided from that first day that I would come back the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth day. What it taught me over the years is that we need each other to do the things that must be done. I felt like this was a calling from our Heavenly Father, that this must be done, that it was time to do this. I can't ignore that calling.
The heat that day when we did my scene, they had we were up on some hill. It was 106, felt like 110 in the shade, and they had a young woman carry an umbrella over me, and they constantly gave me water and cold compresses, and I had to stay in character, and I wept quite a bit, and that would heat me up. The weeping heated me, but I really didn't feel that uncomfortable because I was totally inside myself.
Everybody in that set was like, this is something that we believe in it, and let's get it done. I surrounded myself with people I believed in. From the acting standpoint, I mean, people just pitched him. I mean, like James Earl Jones lended us his voice. I mean, which is the ultimate voice. Which when the film opens, it validates, you know, the whole story right off. Say, well, James Earl Jones is down. Well, it must be something we need to check out. We need to listen to. Now, Rosalind Cash, who was one of my heroes, man, from the 70s and the 80s, and like a lot of my friends who haven't even gotten this shot, she hasn't, to this day, gotten her due as an actress that she deserves. And she's one of the people I've admired, you know, for a long time, and to have the opportunity to work with her, you know, Rosalind Cash, was a rush for me. And she, as everybody did, and I had a lot of my college buddies in there, Mike Hartson and Ren Brown, who plays the guy with the multiple personalities, Andre and Emily and Ren, just tore it up. So they gave me, because it wasn't a challenge, because they gave me free reign, so to speak, and they trusted me, I trusted them. I told them I have very specific ideas about what I want. And I guess the upside of it was you could do what you want to, finally. I mean, you know, on other projects, whatever it may be, like Rosalind said before, you do the work and it's gone. I mean, when you leave the set, it's out of your hands. So from beginning to end, to have an idea and then to see it all the way through till it's on the big screen, what's up there is what we all strove for. Then everybody gave input. And then going back to Rosalind, she would ask, what do you want? I would tell her what I want, and then she would think about it, and she would do it. And Ren the same thing. Carmen Argenziano plays Dr. Coven. Same thing, and across the board. Joseph Calloway I had worked with. I had done a short, just acted in a couple of years ago. And Sandra Middleton was my first AD, was my right hand on the set, helped me run the set. You know, when I'm trying to get in character, she'll kind of take it and run with it. And Joseph Calloway, who was our director of photography, really gave us the whole look of the film. I told him, I said, look, first of all, I don't want this to look like a typical quote-unquote short film. I don't want this to look like a student film. My expectations are very high of what I'm looking for, and I just want it to look and feel like a feature film that happens to be 30 minutes. And that's what he gave me. And I kind of let him run because he's got the experience, he's got the expertise. I told him what I wanted. I told him, just like we talked about, this whole vibe here. I said I want it to look moody, I want lights, I want shadows, the darkness, especially of the mental institution. And he gave it to me. I don't believe in stepping on people's toes as a director. Going back to your question, you do just that as a director. You direct people in the vision that you want, and once you delegate that job, let them do their job. And plus the fact, I mean, they bring so much to it. Joseph brought so much to it just in his lighting, and Eli, who was our gaffer, they work hand in hand. They're the ones that gave the film its whole feel and its whole look. And again, Sandra Middleton was our first AD, and Paulette Holman did the wardrobe. Before this, I directed 4 music videos, and Paulette did the wardrobe on all the videos before, and we'd worked together on a project called Heat Wave for TNT. But Paulette, again, I said, look, we're doing this biblical thing, and you know what I need? Just kind of go for it. And she would come back, she would get certain things, a look, and let me okay it, make sure that's what I was looking for. But she just ran with it. Kim was carrying this big case of film up this big old hill by herself to see the dedication of this woman who could head trip on being a celebrity and being an actress, saying that she put all that aside, as she does anyway. I mean, that's her whole thing. She doesn't head trip off being a star, but put it all aside and just work as hard as everybody else. And she gave 110%.
It's always good to have family around, and we've always been a close family. The Underwood family and our family back home, you know, we've always been close-knit, and that translates into our business affairs.
I love to see dreams come true, and this is something, as I said, this project and being a production company, being able to make meaningful films to blacks and for all people, is just gives us a great deal of pride. See, my 2 sons, Frank Jr. and Blair, are producing this film, and my daughter Marlo is the assistant to the director, who is Blair.
Marlo was her sister, and she was working in the industry at that time. You talk about a tremendous help. More than a tremendous help, she was literally Blair's right and left arm. She was there every second, every production meeting, anywhere from copying scripts to running errands. She just did it all.
The movie said to me is, believe in what's right and do it.
We have to stop hearing South Central and thinking ugly. We have to stop it. We have to stop hearing Harlem and thinking ugly. We have to stop hearing Cabrini Green in Chicago and thinking ugly.
In one sentence, I would define this piece, this movie, as a wellspring of knowledge.
This film was a learning experience, and it will be a learning experience for children, adults, teenagers, and any race of people, I hope.
So I think that this film is an exciting and provocative challenge to many of the questionable assumptions that have guided us in the church and in the theological community as well as in the university today.
It is a film which will challenge people's perception and concept of the black man in today's society.
I talked to a lot of people about this film, and nobody has gone away unaffected by this film. Some of the people I've talked with say that the film has stayed with them, still stays with them. And a lot of people are saying, when will we see this film? It's got good word of mouth. It's a beautiful film.
We, as a collective group, can take our individual talents and come together for one common goal, and that is to heal and unify and edify and uplift the people, all people.
That there is a tremendous, tremendous visual effect being presented in this film. When it's one thing to talk about it in theory, but when you see it and the portrayal of it and the reality of it, it's positively provocative.
My angle is touching people's lives, making them think. It's an exciting thing to be able to make people smile and to make people feel good about themselves. Somebody had asked me, well, what was the best, after you showed the movie for the first time, what is the best compliment you got? And a young actor friend of mine had called me up that night and he said, first of all, it inspired him to do his own project because he had seen what we had done with the production company. So he got on his typewriter and started writing. He said, but more importantly than that, man, I saw this man on the cross that looked like me. And all of a sudden I had a whole new perception of myself. I saw myself in a whole different light because I looked like Jesus and he looked like me. So man, that makes it all worth it. If people see the film, if nobody else sees this film, and I hope many people will see it, but that made it worth it because not only did it put a smile on his face, but it went much deeper. It lifted him up.
This process is difficult for me because I'm so effusive about it. There are two words that come to mind every time I think of the second coming, and those words are glory, hallelujah.